tonight we've got a very interesting night ahead of us. 3 different winemakers from 3 different parts of, well, Australia and New Zealand. We've got Rod Easthope over in New Zealand and Rob Paulazzo in Mildura, I believe, and Phillip down there in Victoria. I'll hand over to them very quickly, but again, as has been the case for the last couple, I'll just quickly run through a few housekeeping points. We cannot see you or hear you, and so if you do want to ask a question, please click down the bottom in the Q&A section and type your question there, and I will attempt to ask the guys as we go, but anything that we miss, we'll try and finish off at the end of the evening. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Rod, who will introduce himself, and then we'll get the chat going all about Pinot. Rod, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Paul, and good to see you too, Rob and Phillip. Great to catch up with all the angels that are online as well. So I'm coming to you from the cellar here in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. So we're a couple of hours behind you. It's quite late, quite dark. My family has banished me to the winery for this event because apparently I yell when I'm on Zoom. So if I end up yelling, it's because I'm old and I don't understand the technology, and I think I have to yell right across the Tasman to get to you guys. But yeah, my story is always a good story when it comes to winemakers and naked wines. I had apparently the best winemaking job in New Zealand for a while as chief winemaker for Craigie Range, and got a call from one of the young bucks at Naked Wines and said, "Can't you make some wine for us?" And I said, "No, I can't. I've got a great job already." And they don't let up. A couple of days later rang, "I really think you should make some wine for Naked Wines. We'd love to have you on board." And without a silver spoon in your mouth, the opportunity to branch out into your own winemaking without some person telling you how to do it is an opportunity that you just can't pass up. So I took that leap back in 2012, and here I am still making wine, but in an independent way, in my own way. But Pinot Noir has always been a very important part of what I've done. And, I think when you're a young wine person coming into the wine game, flamboyant varieties always take your eye, especially in New Zealand, the aromatic varieties like Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, and up here in Hawke's Bay, Cabernet, wines that, speak really loudly of the varietal from which they're made. And it takes a while to come around to Pinot Noir because Pinot Noir doesn't speak of itself so much, it speaks of where it comes from. And I think the beauty of Pinot Noir is its transparency and its ability to transport the place it was grown to a glass of wine is unparalleled in the wine world. And it took me a while to mature into that moment of understanding Pinot Noir. And I suppose that culminated in a visit to Burgundy in 1997, and then to see that patchwork quilt of incredible vineyards demarcated into all these tiny little facets. And you thought, this is ridiculous. These tiny little vineyards all have their own name and crew. And once you understand Pinot Noir, it makes a lot of sense, because Pinot Noir can translate every single soil type and slope and topography into an individual taste that is just captivating. And that's once you're down that rabbit hole with Pinot Noir, it's a thirst that you just can't quench, that you have to keep discovering. My story is very much.
Well, quickly, Rod, what would you say that when you talk about that, they're so different, yet they're so close? Is it true that you could sort of walk a couple of meters and try a wine, and then walk another couple of meters and try a wine from that vineyard and that row, and they would all taste significantly different, or are different enough for you to tell that they were from different parts of the vineyard?
Definitely. When you're obsessed with Burgundy and when you could still afford to drink lots of it, which has changed a lot over the last few years, you could certainly learn just by taste and smell alone, narrow it down to village appellations, which is incredible just to discern that from a glass of wine. And then if you were really down that rabbit hole of understanding Pinot Noir, that you could actually discern individual vineyards within villages, then you understand that Pinot Noir has an immense ability to transport place into taste. But having said that, your buying decision in Burgundy or any great Pinot Noir comes down to who actually made it. So I think the vineyard, the soil, the slope, the topography, the climate determines the potential, but it takes the vector, which is the human being, and its cultural influence over that terroir to really make it something great. So I think often, I think the Burgundians at their peril discount the human influence over that terroir, but the cultural influence, which is footprints in a vineyard and blistered hands in the winery or the vineyard is pivotal to expressing that difference as well. So hence why we don't put vineyards on a Zoom conference. We put people that actually make the wine in front of you.
Sure, makes sense. And what's your philosophy when you start making Pinot?
It's moved a lot over the years. I focus on an area of New Zealand called Marteborough, which I would regard as New Zealand's original and spiritual home of Pinot Noir. It's the driest spot in the North Island, at the base of the North Island. It's bony, it's windy, it's barren, it's a hard place, and it's not for the faint-hearted. If you shove a shovel into that ground, you end up with a wrist injury pretty quickly. It's tough going, but Pinot Noir seems to like those environments and extract the best from the people that accept that challenge to try and grow good Pinot Noir and make good wine out of it. But, you know, in the beginning, I think like all young winemakers, you want wines to do the thinking for you. So you try and extract as much fruit and tannin, and then you laden it with oak. And if a little bit of oak is good, then more must be better, right? That's how you start your journey in winemaking. And then you grow up and you slowly learn where to not pull on those levers or press those buttons as hard as you did when you were young. And so for me, over time, it's become very much about taking my hands off the reins and looking to extract less and making more delicate wines. And I think especially with Pinot Noir, what I alluded to in the beginning, that transparency to translate your story and your place comes when you actually take your hands off the levers and not pull on all those levers so hard. So by that, we do a lot more whole bunch, which means we don't destem or crush the berries as hard as we used to. We don't plunge or punch down the ferments as hard as we used to. And we press and we put it in a barrel and we wait. And if we've done the job in the vineyard, and like I said, a lot of footprints put there, then it tends to work out pretty well.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds amazing. You sound very passionate. Is there a moment that you can sort of think to that you fell in love with Pinot?
Yeah, I was challenged by a very good friend while I was making wine in South Africa, who was a Burgundian, and I said I just didn't quite get Pinot Noir and Burgundy. You know, I was very much in the bigger was better stage of my evolution, and he took me out for dinner and put me through my paces through a lot of great Grand Cru that night, and I saw the light. And but I cleverly at the end of that dinner said to him, you know, I really don't think I get it yet. Hoping he would have to take me out and do it all again, but I did get it. And his name's Alex Dale, and he's been a great mentor to me and taken me to Burgundy many times and opened doors in that incredible region to wineries and tastings and experiences that I never would have had unless you'd had someone like that alongside you to challenge your perceptions about what wine could be. So yeah, there's a few moments along there, but I think anytime you open a great glass of wine and you put it in some fabulous glassware and get to spend some time with it, whether it's Burgundy, Barolo, anywhere really, you can have a great experience that changes your perception about how you're going to make your own wines. So it's a journey. I know that's an overused phrase, but you keep challenging yourself with great glasses of wine to do it yourself.
Exactly. So talk to us about Martinborough Pinot. What are the sort of characteristics and of the wine that you make?
Yeah, I think Martin, many of the people watching or listening to this may have tasted New Zealand Pinot Noir, and Martinborough is a very, very tiny place. It makes a lot of noise. It's only about 300 odd hectares of grapes in Martinborough, so its reputation is built on a tiny volume of wine, and then has been overtaken by the flamboyance and beautiful scenery and drama of Central Otago in recent years. And there's a lot of great wines made in Central, but for me, Martinborough produces the quintessential New Zealand Pinot Noir, mainly because we get a lot more structure there, a lot more tannin. It tends to change with time in the bottle, whereas I'd say Central Otago Pinots get older in bottle, but they don't really change. They become older versions of themselves, whereas Martinborough tends to morph into something more earthy, more truffle, more tertiary characters that can become a little bit more beguiling, sometimes more challenging to the people tasting those wines. So yeah, I'd say structure and just complexity is what comes from Martinborough, but it's a tenuous place to try and either make a living or stake your reputation. It's really, if you're a hobby type farmer or grape grower in Martinborough, you're doomed. It takes the very best to limit your yields, do everything perfectly to extract anything from that region. So there's a lot of rubbish produced there as well. Its reputation is built on the best dozen winemakers each year producing some good wines. But I'd say that Rob and Philip would concur that maybe holds true for a lot of people in Pinot Noir wine regions, that it's easy just to put some vines in the ground and make some wine and hope for the best. But with Pinot Noir, it takes a lot more than that.
Exactly. We've got a question here from Chris Sorensen, who says, if terroir is so decisive, then what are the factors that make a Pinot Noir distinctively similar to other Pinot Noir from other places? Yeah,
well, I think, you can't negate the fact that we're all working with the same variety, and the cuttings and the clones and the wood that makes up the vine itself. None of our young countries had any of that material a few decades ago. So those vines and those cuttings have actually come from France. So we're dealing with the same vegetative material. All of us. It may morph slightly over the years as you propagate it and change it, or it gets infected with viruses or changes. But we're still using the same vector. So I'm not saying that the character of Pinot Noir disappears over all this terroir. I'm just saying it can hold that character of its varietal, but it is still the ultimate grape for having the ability to translate the site characters alongside those varietal characters into the glass of wine.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Rod. We'll pass on to Rob now. How are you, Rob?
Very well, Paul. Yeah, great to be here, and great to be here with Rod and Philip as well and catch up. It's always good to chat as winemakers, and good evening to everybody out there, all the angels and people that are tuned in. My name's Rob Paulazzo. I've been making wine for Naked Wines since around early 2015. That was the first, I guess, time for me to, I guess, begin breaking away from working for the big corporate wineries that I had in the past and venture out into doing my own thing. And when I began talking to Naked about it, it still seemed like a bit of a dream, and I'd sort of have to pinch myself being this many years down the track and seeing where it's gone and how many vintages I've produced and everything like that. So it's been pretty exciting. So yeah, but for those of you who don't know, I'm based in the Riverina region of southern New South Wales. So it's based around the town of Griffith. And apart from the majority of my fruit from several other regions in southern New South Wales. So Tumbarumba being the first where I sourced my Pinot Noir from, which we'll talk about tonight, and also my Chardonnay. I also source fruit from the Hilltops region, where I get Shiraz and Cabernet, and also Canberra district, where I get Shiraz as well. So 4 different regions there, but home base is Riverina, and I'm a born and bred Riverina boy from there originally. So always good to come back and I kicked off my own business there and based all my winemaking out of there. So yeah, and I suppose how it all started originally. My family being born and bred there, and my grandfather migrated from Italy when he was 16, and he worked in vineyards and things like that, and he eventually kicked off his own farm and bought land and planted the first vines. So that was over 80 years ago that he first sort of kicked the dirt and put a vine in the ground. So, I suppose, if I have to look back and see where it all started for me, I think him doing that back then was certainly the catalyst for when I was a young kid, and watching him sort of work in the vines and things like that. And he was also very, very much an innovator back then. And I know when I was a lot younger, and he had one of the first mechanical harvesters in town. And one of the first memories I have of wine or vineyard or anything was riding on that with him. So it wasn't much of a machine. It was pretty rough and ready, and no air conditioned cabins, and I was just sort of sitting on the side. But it was pretty good fun back then, and I think that was probably my first wine memory. And from then I think I was probably never destined to really do anything else, I think. So once I sort of finished school, I began working in wineries, and became a winemaker for McWilliams more recently, before I went to branch out on my own with Naked. And prior to that also Orlando Wines, and then had a bit of a stint in New Zealand as well, in Marlborough for Gießen, and also worked a fair bit overseas as well. So it took a bit of a journey, and pretty happy to sort of find my base and sort of dig in here with Naked, which has been amazing. So
fantastic. And so what do you reckon? Can you explain to everyone what your philosophy is when it comes to making Pinot?
So with Pinot,
and explain to people where you actually get your Pinot from.
Sure. So firstly, region I mentioned before, I get my Pinot Noir from a region in southern New South Wales called Tumbarumba. And apart from being an amazing word to say, it's a great little region, awesome town, soul to the earth people. It's where it is in southern New South Wales. It's basically halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. So if you drew a direct line from Sydney and Melbourne, it's about halfway. So it's in the foothills of the Snowy Mountains. So it's quite high altitude, and it's extremely cool climate. So we'll talk about cool climate. You'd probably describe it as cold climate. So a quarter of the year there, a quarter of the time of the year is spent under 2 degrees in the area. So it gets pretty damn cold. But, it's always the way that in the, most adverse conditions is when you get the best results. And certainly that's the case with, a variety that can be a stubborn but yet rewarding like Pinot Noir. So that's where I source my Pinot Noir from. As far as my winemaking philosophy goes, I guess, to put it very simply, it's about making expressive wines. And so when I mean expressive, I talk about a few things. So certainly expression of fruit is one of the most important things. We heard Rod talk about it before about certainly going through certain stages of your career where you find using certain types of oak and doing this and doing that, and then you want to do more. And I think sometimes less can be more, especially with a varietal like Pinot Noir. So I think it's about utilising those tools to sort of support the fruit and everything else. And I think also with regards to expression, the three major things are certainly expressing the varietal, the region, and also the vintage. So with all my wines, you know, especially with something like Pinot Noir, it's being able to really make it quite simply say is to pick up a glass of it and say that is distinctly Pinot. So often, you know, when we talk about Pinots that may not be as great, as often when you look at them and you go, oh, well, it doesn't really look varietal to me. So that's certainly one part. The other part is the region. You know, we heard Rod talk about before about, you know, Pinot being able to express the strip of dirt that it's on better than any other varietal. And I certainly tend to agree there. So making Pinot in a style that certainly is indicative of Tumbarumba as a region is certainly something that's really important to me, and that philosophy is in all my wines as well. And also the vintage. It's really important. Wine's one of the only things where what's in your glass tells a story of each individual year. So that certainly doesn't happen with beer. It doesn't happen with spirit or anything like that. So what's in your glass tells a story of what happened in a particular time, in a particular year, in a particular area. So it's amazing like that. So it's important that the wine remains true to your style, but also tells that particular story of the vintage as well.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. So can you elaborate on the characteristics of Tumbarumba as say, opposed to Martinborough or wherever?
Yeah, so I guess Tumbarumba is a pretty distinct region, being easily the coldest region in New South Wales and one of the coldest in the country. What I love about Tumbarumba Pinot is firstly just the purity of fruit that comes from the area. So it's just got a lovely, distinct cherry flavour, strawberry, really pristine fruit characters, I like to call them. And it's a difficult area to sometimes get Pinot Noir right. It originally began as a sparkling wine area back in the early 80s. I think 1982 was the first year vines were planted, and it's evolved into certainly being a lot more focused on table wines for a long while now. So yeah, just certainly that medium-bodied style, just lovely purity of fruit, and a very silky, elegant palate is certainly what I believe sets Tumbarumba apart from some other regions. Probably the biggest thing on the palate is this mineral acidity that I think is very much distinctive of the area. So in the soil composition there is elements of white granite in the soil, and I think that really sort of passes into the final wine. So if you talk about any wine or Pinot Noir, for instance, being able to tell a story of the strip of dirt or the area that it's from, I think that's probably one of the most distinctive characteristics of Tumbarumba, that mineral slatiness that you really see on those wines. It gives the wines lovely structure, a lovely perfume, a really youthful freshness, which means that Tumbarumba Pinot as a young wine is extremely lively. It's very perfumed, but also it has the ability to age quite well because it has that structure and that acid backbone in order to go the journey.
And what are some of the characteristics of those older, for the older characteristics that you talk to?
So the wine generally, rather than as a young wine, you'll see a lot of those primary fruit characters, your strawberry, your sour cherries and those type of things, and your florals. And once the wine begins to, I guess, go over that little sort of age hump, you'll start to see a lot of those more tertiary characters come in. So the wine does start to look a little bit more, for lack of a better, more that forest floor that does tend to look a little bit more earthy. Some of those sort of spicy character, the cinnamon spice characters that are probably just lingering in the background and adding a bit of complexity as a young wine really start to show through as the wine tends to get on a little bit in age. But it does also seem to hold on to that plushness in the mid palate, so that sort of velvety texture, certainly in the really good years. And I think that's certainly the hallmarks of great Pinot is something I always look at, just that silky mouthfeel and that velvety texture.
Yeah, cool. We've got a question here from Paul Miller. Climate change is meaning more extreme heat events in summer, early autumn. How are we going to deal with that as far as Pinot Noir wine grape quality is concerned? and where will the great parcels of grapes come from in the future? I think it's quite apt considering what happened to you in 2020.
Yeah, that's some of those memories are still pretty raw, and I guess it's a really interesting question, and I think we could probably chat with a whole new Zoom conference on this, but I think certainly with regards to what we're seeing a lot of, and especially in Australia and all around the world, is vintages are coming on a little bit earlier. They're a lot more, things are warming up, so things are ripening a lot quicker. And you see, and if I just want to talk about a region such as Tumbarumba, where it was certainly back in the day as a sparkling wine region, and it certainly still produces amazing sparkling wine, it has been able to transition into producing table wines, especially with regards to Pinot, with the fact that it probably is a little bit warmer now than it probably tended to be back when it was established. So I think probably what we will see, Tumbarumba is a very small region. It's similar to when Rod was describing Martinborough. There's a similar area under vine. It's around about 300 hectare under vine total. So it is a very small region, but I think when you will see a region that was so cold, such as Tumbarumba, I think will be a pretty important region, certainly for New South Wales wine, moving forward with regards to Pinot Noir and also Chardonnay as well. I think in my opinion, I think it's the flagship region for both in our state, and I think it'll become more important from here for sure.
And do you want to just quickly discuss what happened in 2020? There's a few questions about the fires and the smokes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's Pinot is something I love, and it's provided me a lot of joy. I've been able to travel a lot of places and work in Burgundy 4 times. It's given me immense joy, and I can honestly say, hand on heart, that one of the toughest things I've had to endure from a work perspective is that first week in January this year, when got the message saying that, I knew the fires were quite close to the Tumbarumba area. And then I got woke up to a text message showing a picture of the vineyard where my Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are from that had been completely burnt through by the bushfires. So it was pretty harrowing to look at early. So, so I guess in that, like a lot of other people going through a million other things around the area, there was, quite a lot of uncertainty and just a lot of emotion and everything, you name it, flying around. So it was a pretty tough time. And I guess one of the real positives to come out of that was the way a lot of the angels rallied around in support once they did. I think certainly there was a lot of support around my Tumbarumba wines that were out for sale at the time as well. So everyone wanted to get behind and support those, and it was really good. Just gut wrenching for the vineyard, considering it was about 25 years old, which is quite old for the area. So really established vines, and not being biased, but the fruit coming from that vineyard for the people who own it is some of the best fruit in the region, without doubt. So to see all the hard work that have been put through in that vineyard, and also the wines have been able to produce, and just to see what happened to it was just so sad. But if there is a positive again to come out of it, I'm very happy to say that shortly after the fires subsided and there was a bit of rainfall, very happy to say that the vines began to shoot again in the vineyard. So green shoots popped out, and I think a lot of people breathed a bit of a sigh of relief then. I think it was certainly all the end posts, all the wires, all the trellising systems all have to be replaced, which is a monumentally huge job. But the real saving grace was that the vines somehow survived. Just such resilient plants. I don't know how they could have possibly survived a fire that melted sheds and torched through tractors and metal and things, but it did. So good news is it's not a complete bulldoze job, so it'll be back again. And that's really good. So I guess we'll still a lot of water to pass under the bridge. We'll see how things pan out in spring once there's flowering and things like that. But the good thing is it survived. So yeah, it's just amazing.
And there's another from Michael Etherington who just says, but beyond the initial loss of grapes, what do the fires mean for the maturity and production of fruit in the area going forward?
Yeah, so in the area itself will be fine. There was only really 3 vineyards that were affected that actually got hit physically by fire. One of the ones was the one I just spoke about then, which survived. Another one got hit as well, quite substantially. And then there was a third one where just a few rows on one particular side was singed. So as far as the area goes itself, unfortunately, there were just probably two major vineyards that were burnt. So the majority of the region is fine. So it'll bounce back next year. As far as what happens to those particular vineyards, as far as sort of yield and reproducing and all that kind of thing, sort of as I touched on before, we'll know more during spring once we have flowering and we can see sort of where the vines are there. So we can't really tell at this point because the vines are completely dormant and shut down. So once we sort of get through to spring and see how things flower again and stuff like that, we'll be able to get a bit of an indication on, what sort of fruit set we're looking at and, what sort of bounce back and yield the vines will bring. So, I guess time will tell.
Well, it sounds like it's better news than potentially could have been.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll pass on to Philip, but just brief before we do, if I forgot to mention, we do have 2 polls that we're running this evening. They will pop up on your screen any minute now. So please feel free to vote on the polls, and we can discuss the answers at the conclusion of tonight's Zoom. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Philip. Philip, how are you?
Very well. I'll just get this off my screen if I can. Here we go. Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for this opportunity, but thanks to all everybody who's watching this. This is a whole naked's a new experience for me, and this Zoom session is very much a new experience.
Yeah, not many of the angels probably really know who you are or where you came from, so it'd be nice for you to give them a bit of an introduction to Philip.
Well, my life in wine is a bit different to Rob and Rod's. I came in quite late, so despite growing up on a farm, I went off, did an accounting degree, went to Switzerland to do a master's degree, and realised that I really wasn't cut out for the corporate world. So, and at that time, I just really started to enjoy wine, and I was spending a lot of time from Switzerland. It was very easy to go to Burgundy, and I had a friend of mine's fiance's father had a vineyard in Mercure, and I used to go and help him out on the weekend. And all of a sudden I thought, no, I'm not for the corporate world. And by this stage I was 37, and I thought, no, I'm going to go back and start a farm. Now, I don't like sheep. I've had a lot of that in my experience with sheep in my early days, but I was an equestrian. So I thought, yeah, horses, I want to do some more work with horses, but I think I'll grow grapes. And I think it should be Pinot, because by that stage I'd really as the guys know, it's almost like a disease, Pinot. Who described it as the rabbit hole? I think it was Rod. It is a rabbit hole. It is, and that's not to say that I think we all enjoy other wine, but there's something very special about Pinot. And I guess the moment that I really jumped on board on Pinot was just before I went to Switzerland. I was doing wine education with Nick Shevladowski, who was Nick's Wine Merchants. And one night he bought the class a half bottle of Latache, DRC Latache, 82.
Wow.
And I tasted this wine and I thought, my God, what the hell is this? And I thought, this is like no other wine I've ever tasted. And that just sort of stuck in my mind. And I guess it was the motivator for when I was in Switzerland to actually get really interested, not just in wine, but in particular in Burgundy. And as Rod said, like, we don't drink as much Burgundy as we used to because the prices are, you can still find good, yeah, you can still find good Pinot at reasonable, and I would say reasonable, but no, it's a disease in a positive way, what I'd call a positive addiction, if you like. And it, so I did some study, I did some research, I looked everywhere. I thought the Macedon ranges in particular, if you want to grow Pinot, you've got to be cool, like, and take the comment on Tumbarumba. Yeah, it's a great region for Pinot and Chardonnay, and they sort of do well side by side. And
what just everyone has talked about the cool climate. Why is cool climate so important?
Well, the other guys might chime in on this, but I think that it's a very selective variety. Unlike Chardonnay, which it can, in really cool areas, it'll be citrus based. I think Chablis, even Chablis warming, talk about global warming, through to the very ripe areas, where the warmer areas, well, it expresses itself more as sort of tropical fruit and passion fruit, you name it. But so all those Chardonnays are good, but Pinot doesn't work like that. Pinot, if it's too warm, the colour will just die, the acid will die, it'll just be a sweet, uninteresting, not even, it has no structure. So I think more than anything, Pinot, it really needs that acid structure more than anything else. And the only way to see those berry characters in that is in cool climate. It just becomes sort of almost nondescript in those warmer areas.
Right.
I don't know what the other guys think of that, but I reckon it's a very, I used to say it was a very selective mistress, but I'm not really sure that's politically correct anymore. So I'll just say it's a selective variety.
Oh, fair enough. Sorry, you're saying about Macedon ranges. Macedon ranges.
Yes. Now, just so for those of you who don't know, I established Curly Flat Vineyard. So I started that back in 1989, and I did 20 vintages there. Several of those, when I first started, I always thought the winemaking, I would never be a winemaker. I thought there was something mystical about winemaking that I would never understand. And the fact is, when you study viticulture, you've got to do quite a lot of wine science, wine production, wine assessment, all these things. And after a couple of years of study, I thought to myself, at CSU, I thought to myself, the hard part is growing the damn stuff. If you grow it really well and you've got really good quality fruit, and I tell you, with Pinot, it's got to be good quality. It's not difficult to make good wine. The whole thing is about the fruit. So right. It's all about the vineyard, particularly with Pinot. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll try some winemaking. And I got Gary Farr as my mentor and my advisor. So Gary Farr from then at Bannockburn, now at By Far. And so I don't know that I could have had anybody better. It was really, and you did exactly what Gary told you, or otherwise you're in deep trouble. But it was, his influence on me was extraordinary. And it was, and I really thank Gary for sort of, it was all about, he was very vineyard focused, and you see that in the whole family now, but also about respecting fruit. and but also he really drives structure, and he taught me to a large degree not to mess around with it. Like just
Can you just explain when you say structure, what you mean by structure?
okay. I think with the structure starts with the acid backbone. Without that, and try and get that naturally, because if you try and introduce that by adding acid, just simply getting, I mean, some people think that don't worry about the vineyard, let's get it in the winery and we'll fix it up. It doesn't work like that, particularly with Pinot. So you've got to get that acid backbone, and then you've got to have the flavours that hang off that. So I'm talking here about the grape stage, not about what happens later in the winery, because then you start putting little layers of icing on it. But 90% of it is what comes out of the vineyard. Or you can use the 80-20 rule if you want to, but 80% of it's done in the vineyard. And the biggest danger, particularly with Pinot, is the ability of the winemaker to take it downhill. When you try and put your thumbprint on it, that's when you'll take the fruit downhill. To a large degree, you've got to actually just accept that you're basically almost a custodian of this fruit, and you've got to you've got to work with that. You've got to actually, for instance, Gary would say, "No music. I want you to listen. I want you to smell. I want you." Like he was really strong on interacting with the fruit, and not putting a saddle on it and try and ride it like a horse, but just work it very gently. And as Rod said, the idea of whole bunching and things like that. But those decisions are a year-on-year decision. There is no recipe. One thing that not only does Pinot tell us about place, it also tells us about time. Very much about time. And talking of DRC, I was fortunate enough to be doing a tasting at DRC, and Bernard, who was then chief winemaker, gave me a glass, and I said to him, "What year was it?" And he said, "Philip, you tell me." And there is only 1 year that he could have given me where I could nail it very quickly. I said, "A cool year. This must be 2000. This must be 2004." And 2004 was a really cool year. Some American writer said, no, it wasn't about coolness. It was about the coccinelle, the ladybird. There was a lot of ladybirds. The fact is, most fruit is not ripe. Like, it's just got this green character, and that's the thing about Pinot. It really stamps. It stamps the year too, as well as the place. And in fact, Jancis Robinson wrote about the Curly Flat 2004 Pinot. She said, "Is there a better 2004 Pinot anywhere?" So I took that. I don't want to be the best, but I would like to be among the best.
Interesting stuff. So we sort of left your story of Curly Flat. Could you just and how you ended up at Naked, and then to the wine that you actually made for us.
Well, maybe I was avoiding something there, Paul.
You can flush over it.
No. My exit from Curly Flat was a long overdue divorce settlement, and it was going to end up in court. And I thought the brand and the staff didn't need that, so I decided that I would ask my business partner, who was my former wife. I said, "Okay, this is what I want, and I'm out of here." And my friend Sam Plunkett of Wine by Sam, he said to me, he was not happy about me leaving Curly Flat, and I reluctantly was leaving, because that was sort of 30 years of my life, 20 vintages. And Sam was, as you know, is very much a pillar, for want of a better word, of naked. And he said, "Oh, Philip, you know, you're going to go and try and set up again, and you're going to need help, and you need. I want to talk to Naked about you. What do you think?" And I said, "Oh." And he said, "Come and see me and we'll sit down." I went and saw Sam, and like, he's a really good friend and he's quite a special person. And so it was Sam who introduced me. And when I spoke with you, I knew the business model, and I thought, this could be pretty interesting. Like, it's a big challenge for me, having only handled my own fruit. Mind you, I'd worked in Long Island, New York. I'd worked in Willamette Valley in Oregon. I did a few vintages in Burgundy. The longest was over 3.5 months at Domaine de Monty, where I found out that some of the things they say they do, they don't actually do. But it was a great experience. And now, so then I thought, well, what am I going to do with fruit? And it's amazing how just doors can open. So I was intending maybe to start with you in 2020, and then all of a sudden I got offered fruit from a really great vineyard in the Denton Vineyard of View Hill out of Yarra Glen. Beautiful, very scenic vineyard. It's quite closely planted. The Pinot area is quite closely planted up on top of the hill. It's all got to be handpicked, and like, it just fell in. I didn't know John Denton, but I knew Simon, his son, who's a restaurateur, and he'd supported me at Curly Flat for a long time. And he said, "Oh, gee, if you guys want fruit, you can start this year." I went over on the Tuesday, looked at the fruit and thought, bloody hell. So I took a sample, ran it back to my mate's place, ran it through a FOSS machine, and rang Phil, the vineyard manager, and said, "I want this picked now." He said, "Well, can't do that, but we can do Saturday." That was 4 days later. And I've got a really good relationship with them. I got both, as you know, both Pinot and Chardonnay for them from 2020. I like Yarra as a place for Pinot. I mean, Mornington has really put itself forward with Pinot, but I suspect that for me, they're better known for Chardonnay. I think the cooler sites of the Yarra, it's some of the best Pinot in Victoria. I still prefer, in some ways, I really like Macedon Ranges. As you know, our new site is 750 metres high. Tuesday morning, it was negative 7.5 degrees, not on site. That's in the town of Trentham. The actual site is 50 metres higher, but was 6 degrees warmer. And that's just about airflow. So, you know, I think in selecting a new vineyard site, I was very focused on frost, because that's part of climate change. We could have a whole full night on climate change.
I think so.
But it was really great to be able to use Sam's facilities, and you know that he's got a great winery. Like, it's really just a great place to work, and it's got a certain calmness about it in that winery that I really, really appreciate. It's got a great team, and we've really enjoyed working with them. So the 2019 straight up was our first one. I'm really pleased that it's gone well.
Yeah.
Had some great feedback from the Angels. That's one of the things I really like about the model, is that interaction with the end consumer. It's not just handing it over. At Curly Flat, I didn't have a distributor. I dealt.
And sold.
Yeah. So the thing with Naked is it brings you really close to the end consumer, and that means a lot. I'm sure the other guys feel that too.
Absolutely. I've just got a quick question here from Paul McGlue, who asks that he's got a bottle of your 219, and he just was wondering when it might reach its peak.
Ooh. I'll just grab the crystal ball on this one. No, I think I think it was probably Rob who was saying early on that you're going to have that sort of concentration, or the fruit will show and sort of dominate the whole thing. And you're seeing that with the straight up, like lots of red and black berries, but time will change that. So those secondary characters probably cut in probably the third year or so, and the tannin structure will be more defined. Those secondary characters will start to flow through. You'll see more. When I say more influence of the oak, it's a different influence. It's those leathery characters and the like, and the earthiness start to show through. So when will it peak? I'd say year 7, at a guess. But this is a whole learning experience for me. This is year 1 off this vineyard.
Yeah, sure.
So it's going to take time.
Yeah. And also Malcolm asks, is phylloxera a big worry in the Yarra? And does growing on rootstock change the result much? Re-terroir, place, etc.
That's an interesting question, particularly the latter part of it. In the first part, is phylloxera a problem in the Yarra? It is. But the problem is the health of the vine, not and there's a hell of a lot of new planting, replanting going on there. In fact, like your lumber nursery and people like that, that's where their big demand is. It's not easy to get hold of planting material unless you're prepared to wait. So it's a problem, but it's not a problem in terms of end wine quality if you're coming off a really good vineyard. The question about rootstock versus own roots and does it change things, I don't know that there's any real scientific evidence to suggest that it does. Like a curly flat, I had five clones on 3 rootstocks. In the new vineyard, we're having 5 clones on 3 rootstocks, but they're not exactly the same rootstocks. I mean, Burgundy is predominantly planted on American rootstock, so I don't think that it's a negative thing in terms of the end result.
Right. And you talk of clones. Can you just briefly explain what clones are and why you have different ones? Right.
Clones are really just a genetic mutation that is deemed to be a positive and therefore is captured by asexual reproduction. In other words, taking cuttings. So all vines that I know of are by asexual reproduction. In other words, they're done by cuttings, not by seeds. The problem with seeds, I mean, you see it in humans. There's no 2 are the same. So and if you look at some clones, they're just as the guys know, particularly Pinot will actually mutate in the vineyard. And in the case of something like, I think it was Mariafell, the Swiss clone, right? The vineyard had mildew and the guy walks in and there's one vine and it's got no mildew. So he thinks, how can this happen? So he takes cuttings of it and it's got, and partly it's because of the fruit structure that it's less liable to be infected by mildew. So then that becomes a new clone.
Right.
So think of it like just like motor cars, like changing things just that little bit. They're still Pinot, but if you take clones like D5, V12 and Mariafell, they're a viticulturalist's dream. They grow straight up, almost without support wires. So they're there's variations. The bunches that can be bigger or smaller, berries bigger, smaller. So the clones are the same thing, just modified a little bit.
Okay, cool. Hopefully that's cleared it up. There's another question just quickly while we're talking to it. Chris Robinson asks, what clones offer new directions in Australia, or are we going to continue on the MV6 and Dijon clones?
One could say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So I think we probably will continue down that path, but I also think there'll be some variation on that. And when I guess with the Dijon clones, he's talking 114, 115. I think we are starting to see some other clones, but not greatly. So I think we will continue. It'll be 80% MV6, 114, 115, and then some playing around with. I'm not sure that 777 has been as successful as some people thought it might be, but I'm putting in 667 as well as 114, 115, MV6 and D2V4, or D4, no, D2V4, which I hadn't heard
Rabbit
of.
hole we're talking about before.
But the reason I did that is Nick Dry, who was the head of Yalumba, he thinks it's a great clone, and a number of people are starting to use it. So, yeah, I think there'll be some variation, but it'll still stick with those three main ones.
Fantastic. Okay, it's been fantastic hearing from all of you. We've got a few questions on lots of different things, so I'll just shoot them out and feel free any of you to jump in. So firstly, Kristen asks, do you all feel that the amount of whole bunch being used has increased lately? I'm seeing larger percentages of whole bunch in Pinot these days, and I'm wondering if it's become trendy to amp up the amount of whole bunch, or have I just become sensitive to the iconic taste?
I'll go first. Well, Philip's experience at Domaine de la Romani Conti would back up the fact that whole bunch is probably a good thing if you've got grapes that can handle that treatment. But certainly I don't even have a destemmer in my winery, so everything we do here with all our reds is 100% whole bunch. And that's driven by the fact that every time I have some spare cash to buy some fine wine, whether it be from Beaujolais, Burgundy, Barolo, wherever, I tend to gravitate towards those styles of wines, and that's informed my winemaking. But I think the mistake a lot of people make with whole bunch is if you put a little bit of whole bunch in your ferment and the rest of it's destemmed, it's a very vigorous ferment, and the action on those stems mean you extract a lot of stemmy green characters. If you're 100% whole bunch, and for the layman out there listening, what that means is just hand-picking bunches, putting them in a big tub, and then slowly letting fermentation, letting that sublime until it naturally breaks down. The actions on those stems is actually very, very gentle. So it's actually about the architecture of that fermentation. It's not about actually extracting anything from the stems. It just means using whole bunches makes it a much more gentle, slow, time release fermentation. And what you can imagine is the biggest action on the grapes, the seeds, the skins, is the slowly growing alcohol. So if you destem grapes right from the outset, and your alcohol increases really rapidly because you've released all that sugar, then you suddenly have got 13, 14% alcohol, which is the solvent that extracts everything from those wines. So it becomes very rapid, very abrupt, and your ability as a winemaker to choose the moment to press or take off, or whether you're going to stop plunging or whatever, gets taken away from you within hours. With whole bunch, there's this very, very long, gradual, slow extraction. It's a time-lapse. Imagine very slow time-lapse photography happening right before your eyes. And it's to me, it's a natural fit with Pinot Noir. There's a few years, I think, that we shouldn't do it, where it's bitterly cold, or you've got a mildew infection on your stems or something like that, where it's just not prudent to do that. But for most years, for us, we're 100% whole much. It's not driven by fashion, it's just driven by the fine wines that I like to drink, and hopefully trying to emulate that taste in our own wines.
Thank you. Severin asks, does that mean it's carbonic maceration? So if it's not, can you explain what that is and the difference?
Yes, definitely. If you're whole bunch fermentation, you've got whole berries, which means you've got some fermentation happening inside the berry before it's been even broken up or torn apart. And that's called carbonic maceration. And, you know, there's a lot of famous wine styles that we don't drink so much anymore, like Beaujolais Nouveau, that are bottled very, very early, that capture all those carbonic maceration characters, which tend to be that bubblegum, confected, very simple fruit characters. Not unattractive, but often very, very primary and simple. So generally, all fermentations get those characters, but we let them then mature in barrel or take some time, and a lot of those estery, simple carbonic characters dissipate. So Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, the world's greatest Pinot Noir, is 100% whole bunch, but no one would call that carbonic maceration in terms of its effect. In the glass or the bottle, I'm pretty sure Philip didn't taste any Cab Mac characters in his 1982 La Tâche, but it would have had some carbonic maceration characters at 6 weeks of age and 3 months of age that then dissipate with time as it was matured. So carbonic maceration is a phase of pretty much all winemaking, and it's whether you choose to bottle the wine with that carbonic maceration character or let that dissipate over time.
Fantastic. Okay, there's Stephen Rosbrook says he loves to chill Pinot. Is that okay with you guys? That's his question.
No problem with me. We tend to drink our whites too cold and our reds too warm. That's where I come from, and certainly, like when you talk about cellar temperature, what does that mean? I mean, that's that can mean anything. So I like to see Pinot, and it's going to warm up in the glass anyway, because you're probably not in a room at 12 or 14 degrees. So to me, that 12 to 14, chill it, but don't super chill it. The only wine that you chill down to 4 degrees is a bad wine that you have to drink. I don't know. What do you think, Rob and Rod?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, look, at the end of the day, you can say it's a personal preference thing. So if someone tells me that they want to have their Pinot straight out of the fridge and drink it cold, then, you know, all power to you. As long as you're drinking Pinot or something like that, then that's fine. But in sort of what you said, I completely agree. I think if you go back to people talking about reds at room temperature, what's a perfect room look like? I think that goes back to what a cellar would be. So, you know, our rooms are around 24 degrees here in Australia, which is, you know, far too warm for something, especially I think as delicate as Pinot. At those sort of temperatures, the wines tend to look a bit clumsy, and you sort of get a little bit more of that alcohol coming out. So what I tend to do, if I get something that's certainly not out of a Vintec or whatever, then, you know, I'll pop it in the fridge for, you know, 20 minutes or something like that just before having it, not to chill it down, but just to take that edge off it. So sort of what you're saying, I think you don't want it cold, you just want the glass cool to the touch. So that's what I certainly go for. So, you know, having them around, I'd say it would probably be around, you know, 14 degrees or something like that. So cool to the touch, but not cold is certainly the philosophy I go for.
Yeah, exactly the same. I invoke Hugh Johnson here. All wines, no matter what style, whether it's from Porto or Tumbarumba, are made to quench And to me, wines don't quench unless they're slightly cooler than the environment that you're in. So, and I agree with Philip, always better to start too cool than too hot, because there's only one thing that's going to happen once it's poured into your glass, is it's going to warm up. And what's fascinating with wine is the changes that, you know, I see all of us have got some decent, nice, large glassware. You pour yourself a large glass, nice and cool, might not be showing much, and then just watch it change as it warms up and you aerate it. You just get 110 different wine experiences in one glass of wine as it changes with aeration and temperature change. It's the same argument for me is not decanting fine old wine and putting it on a mantelpiece for an hour before drinking it. You're missing out on all the changes that wine is going through. You buy a fine wine and let the decanter enjoy all those aerative changes for 1 hour, and you pour it into your glass and it's faded away. You should be enjoying a fine glass of wine, a large glass, and enjoying that, the temperature changes, the aeration changes, the conversation you're having, the arguments you're having, everything should be experienced through a time lapse. And that means temperature, aeration, everything. That's the beauty of wine, which separates it from other beverages like beer and that sort of thing that are consumed with, you know, no thought really.
Thank you. Another one here from Maureen, who says it's a question for all of you. I thought Pinot didn't age well. Is it generally meant to be aged or consumed young?
I think, well, I think that was a sort of urban myth, I think, in a way, that Pinot didn't age well. The fact is, good Pinot ages very well. I had a 1991 Rochford Pinot. 1991, that's 29 years ago. I mean, and it was just so on song. And I've had Burgundies. One of the best Burgundies I had was a 45, and it was just in such incredible shape. The problem is the cork closure is the problem. There's so much variation under cork. And that can often, people can see a negative character in the wine, which is really not a result of it aging, it's a result of the closure. So I'm sure the guys agree. I've had great old Pinots, if they're well structured. And again, I go back to acid. Great Pinot needs this acid backbone, or it's not going to age. It'll fall apart.
Fantastic. I've got another question here, which we haven't really touched on. Nigel McQuitty says he noticed that Rod's Pinot Noir tends to be very light in colour, almost translucent. Many of the Pinot Noirs in Australia are much richer in red colour. Is that a result of terroir or a winemaking process?
Actually, you're probably referring to the 2018, which is what I've got here, and it's the lightest one we've produced, and it's actually a vintage character. 2018 was quite light in colour, and that holds true for the whole region from that particular vintage. But typically we produce quite dark, more tannic, structured wines. I mean, Paul, you'd remember the 15s and 16s and 13 especially as well, quite dark tannic wines. So that tends to be a vintage character. Normally Martinborough, unlucky for the growers, but nice for the winemakers. It throws tiny crops because of very cold periods during flowering and that sort of thing. But 18 was quite an abundant year, bigger bunches, bigger berries, and we just got less colour. We didn't really modify our winemaking, so that's as Rob was saying, telling the vintage story there. I was a little bit concerned early on because it was light and quite, more strawberry red hued than we'd had in previous vintages, but the reviews have been great, and I've really, the wine has now emerged and it's telling its Martinborough story regardless of the vintage as well. So yeah, it's a vintage character.
So the color doesn't necessarily indicate quality or depth of flavor.
No, I would reference Domaine de la Romanée-Conti again. You've got La Tâche, one vineyard, very, very tannic, dark, and then Domaine de la Romanée-Conti itself is often quite light, but is one of the greatest, most long-lived, most ethereal wines of the world. So that's the irony of Pinot Noir sometimes. What you see in the glass doesn't always tell what you're going to experience on the palate.
Totally agree with that. Some of the best Pinot I've had is quite light in colour, and some people do manipulate colour with enzyme and things like that. And I don't understand why you do it, but and I think it's because of this sort of urban myth about the darkness and palate weight, and I don't think they're related in any way.
No.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you can have a Pinot that appears to be quite light and even gives you the impression that it's going to be quite wispy, and then when you taste it, it's actually anything but. It's really generous and really nice and silky and full. So certainly that is one of the enigmas of Pinot, is, that sometimes, appearance isn't everything. And like we certainly see that in Tumbarumba from year and year, just being, so marginal. It doesn't take too much for all of a sudden one year to be, a little bit cooler, a little bit warmer, and colours tend to vary a little bit year on year. So it's just one of the things, I think, but certainly not an indication of quality or lack of, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we better make this the final question. This is for all of you. AG asks, if you've got $100 to spend on a bottle of Pinot, what do you buy at the moment? And does your answer change if the budget is unlimited?
Oh, that's a tough one. $100 is actually quite difficult territory. You can actually buy at $100 a lot of overpriced pretenders on the marketplace, but not quite reach the great wines of the world with $100. You can get yourself into trouble with $100, I reckon, where there's a lot of true, well-made, delicious wines at $50 or $60, and then the ethereal greats far beyond $100. So I don't know why I find $100 quite difficult, but we have a very tiny producer in New Zealand called Bell Hill, which I would mind parting $100 with. And the best vintages of Atarangi in New Zealand, which probably go for about $100 in Australia, I'd imagine, by the time your wet tax gets lumped on top. Yeah. Or I'd probably go to a Premier Cru from Domaine de Monti. I love the Volnays from that part of Burgundy. They match the best of having some power, but are very, very delicate as well, those Volnays as well. So that's probably where I'd go.
Rob?
Yeah, tough one. $100. Yeah, I think, certainly for $100, I'd probably look to some of the, whether or not it even gets me that far, I'd probably look to some of our, probably the guys that really sort of put the stake in the ground for Aussie Pinot, guys like, Farr and Bannockburn and those sorts of things. And, that's probably where I'd venture first. If my budget was unlimited, then yes, to the question, that would certainly change what I'd choose. And again, it's, God, it'd be like kid in a candy store type stuff. So I guess, one of the drawbacks of being a Pinot nut is the thing it's probably hardest on is your bank balance most of the time. But yeah, certainly, look, if I had an unlimited bank balance, I'm not sure where I'd really start, but I'd certainly be heading back over to Burgundy for sure. So. And
Philip?
Good question. And would I spend the $100 on one bottle? To go back to Rod's point, because there's some great value at $50 and $60. I had a Shadowfax Little Hampton, which is their high vineyard just up the road from our new site, and the 2018 made by Alistair. And that was a pretty impressive wine, but it needs time. But if it was a neat $100, would I? There's a few producers in the Yarra, like Mount Mary, for instance, doing really good stuff. If you wanted to go for a heavier style but still really good structure, would be something like Saboteur. And then if I go unlimited, well, then I've got problems. And to go back to Rod's point about maybe a Domaine de Monty around the $100 mark, Premier Cru. There's quite a lot of really good Premier Crus around $100.
Yeah.
But you've really got to know what you're buying, because there's a lot of shit around $100 too.
Yeah.
Would I just go unlimited for a single bottle? No. I'd say, can I have that same amount of money and can I spread it over a portfolio of Burgundy?
Good answer. Good answer. I'm surprised none of you actually mentioned your own wines, but anyway. Thank you so much. There's a lot of other things we could have chatted through, but time's got the better of us. Thank you very much for your time and spending an hour and so with us and the Angels. It's been great.
Thank you.
It's been really good fun. I mean, for me, it's almost been like a little masterclass for me as well. It's been great to catch up with, see Rob again and converse with you, Philip. And thanks for organising this poll, and for all the Angels that we've managed to keep online. Thanks for your time. And I know it's been a very, very interesting year and difficult for some. And I know we've got our Trans-Tasman thing coming, and I think that's going to be very important. This little South Pacific bubble that we've got is going to be very, very important to all of us. So if any of you make it across to New Zealand, we'd love to receive you here at the winery and put something on the barbecue and have a good bottle of Pinot. So all the best to you all.
Fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. Night Angels, we will see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.